All right, it is my distinct privilege to introduce Andy Glockner, co-founder of The Cauldron and also its executive editor. He also wrote a new book, which hopefully he'll talk to you a little bit about. He's giving a presentation today on biometrics, the next and biggest analytics frontier. And with that, I'll turn it over to Andy.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I expected about 12 of you here, so this is a little surprising. And I'm very excited to follow Kirk and his visually enhanced, incredibly detailed, smart information. I'm here to provide you the exact opposite of that. No charts whatsoever to look at. You just get to listen to me for a little while. As mentioned, I just had a book that came out this Tuesday called Chasing Perfection. It really is a book about how the NBA is using technology and analytics in order to build better teams, find better players, and develop them. And this talk is stemming off of that. I wanted to try to give, if I could, a perspective on sort of a centrist media angle on what's going on with biometrics, where we are today. That was sort of the theme of the book, was using the 2014-15 NBA season as a platform to discuss everything that was going on. And now I think we're at a really, really interesting spot in terms of this next generation of data, the health data, keeping players on the court, and that type of stuff. So I want to talk a little bit about that today. And if we have any time at the end, as I watch the countdown clock here, happy to do a little bit of an informal Q&A to talk about the book and where I see the industry right now. Now, the title of the presentation today, Biometrics, the next big thing, I mean, it's not like this is a new thing, right? I mean, we've been talking about biometrics in the same way that we were talking about analytics before analytics became really, really mainstream, popular, and quasi-public. I mean, we talked about, Steve Nash's dietary changes in 2008 and 2009. The Spurs created a big stink when they benched some players in 2012 and got fined by the league. And now suddenly that's very chic in the NBA to basically rest your players strategically. So this has been going on for 6-7 years at least, but we're now at an enormous flux point where now all of this stuff is starting to come public. You see features written by my good friend Pablo Torre, Tom Haberstroh, a lot of ESPN content recently. There was a story yesterday on the Philadelphia 76ers and their sports science expertise and what they're trying to do for their players. So I think this is an interesting time to discuss the topic and see kind of where we are just in a global landscape. So I'll open with an anecdote. I spoke at the beginning of the research for my book. I spoke to Kirk Lacob, the assistant general manager for the Golden State Warriors. This was last October or November 2014, so prior to their really big season that they had. And after listening to him talk about the team for about half an hour, I said, if I could promise you one thing, Kirk, that you had Andrew Bogut and Andre Iguodala healthy for 75 games this season, would you need to know anything else about your team this year? And without missing a beat, he said, no. That's all I would need. I would know we had the pieces to compete. Well, Iguodala played 77 games, albeit coming off the bench because Draymond Green became what Draymond Green is. Bogut played 67 games. They found some backup support in Mo Spates, and they ended up going 83-20 and winning the title. So he looked pretty prescient both in the book and in actuality as they were lifting the championship. So there are team applications. The Spurs thing is interesting too. I reference in the book some research from Ian Levy on the 2013-14 San Antonio Spurs, where they had a roster from 1 through 12 that was inordinately productive, especially the guys outside the top 3 in minutes. So guys in 4 through 12 on that Spurs team that season were outperforming their peers in the NBA at every step down the roster. So it was helped by Kawhi Leonard being the number 4 guy in minutes nominally that year. But the rest of the roster, if you look at the curve in terms of real plus minus, that Spurs team at every position had an advantage down the way. So what happened was when they mix in this strategic resting of players, whether it's within game and cutting minutes or whether it is benching a Tim Duncan for a game or two or whatever it may be, that specific Spurs team really had no drop-off. When you look at what happened, they were able to bring their rotation guys in. There was no drop-off in performance, and that's another application of biometrics leading to an on-court performance that is measurable. And I think that's what the big thing what we're talking about right now is. So let's take a step back where we are, with the biometrics thing. There's no question, unlike some of the on-court data where there might be a little bit of pushback from players or coaches or management, the geeks versus jocks thing that we're still trying to work out. I don't know why 10 years later, but this seems to still be polarizing in some circles, maybe not this conference. Biometrics, in a larger sense, should be a positive thing, right? I mean, this is keeping players healthy. This is extending careers. This is not having, issues after career or getting that extra contract or whatever it may be. But it's really not that kind of simple a thing. I mean, you can look at what you're doing. It's also the most protectable secret, in my opinion. You look at a team that has a draft strategy. Obviously, they have to pick players. And you can start to dissect that if you're one of the other 29 teams. If you have a playing style, that's obviously on film the minute you run a play or the minute you run a different type of set or what you do with your personnel, your lineup combinations. People can try to figure that out. I think, personally, it's much harder to figure out how you're keeping your players on the floor, how you're keeping them healthy. And I think that's a protectable secret and one that I think franchisers are going to put a decent amount of effort into protecting and enhancing at this point. So I think that's all interesting background to talk about where we are at this point and say, I'm going to reference, I know Pablo's sitting right there, I might embarrass him a little bit. He had co-authored an article in 2014 that sort of sets the stage for, I think, where we are today. And there were 2 quotes in it. Let me read this verbatim so I get it right. One was from Jeremy Holsapple, the Dallas Mavericks of athletic performance director. He said, once guys get a feeling for performance at a higher level, it's a big difference from feeling like blank, bleep, which they didn't even think was feeling like bleep. So you take that, that's great, right? I mean, players are getting this advantage now in health and rest and nutrition and whatever, and they don't even understand how compromised they are by the NBA schedule, by how demanding the travel is. And when they get the kind of bump in performance, you start feeling better, like any of us. If we start eating better or exercising, we feel, generally speaking, pretty good. The other quote from Alan Milstein, a leading bioethics attorney and sports litigator representing NBA players. Employers dictating the health care of their employees is a conflict of interest that cannot be overcome. I just refuse to believe that the purpose of monitoring on any long-term basis is the health of the employee. If the purpose is to predict performance, that's not a healthcare purpose, that's an economic purpose. Well, now what? This is, I think, where some of this battleground is going to continue to be fought. We have a collective bargaining agreement coming up that's going to be reopened, and some of this is going to be negotiation. But how do you remedy that difference? How do you look at one end where, on a native basis, feeling better is good for players, and on another basis, you're opening up all of these questions in terms of application and who gets this information and whatever it may be, to the point where a cynic would say, well, this is really an economic benefit for the team. It's not really for the players to do this. And I think that's a really, really interesting conversation point at this point. So when you get to a situation like with Mark Cuban admitting the Dallas Mavericks take blood samples for certain reasons. You look at dietary changes. You look at sleep tracking. All this type of stuff. It may be beneficial. I think it is, generally speaking. It may be invasive. I think it is in some cases. And the marriage of that, the ability to get these parties, the teams, the agents, the outside parties, the players themselves, to get on the same plane about what all of this means, what they're comfortable basically internalizing and giving out, that they're comfortable with where the data is sitting and all that type of stuff, I think is where the crux of where we are right now, and we're going to see a lot of this going forward. So when I look at this, obviously we are at a point, I like to think where we are, again, maybe 5 or 6 years behind this initial wave of analytics that everybody got excited about, and technology came in and started to enhance the ability for us to understand on-court strategy stuff. So then there were shot charts and lineup combinations, whatever it may be. And slowly that stuff became public whenever it was, 2009, 10. This conference obviously is 10 years old. People like Dean Oliver were doing work well before that. The seminal book, Basketball on Paper, came out 2002, 2003. The same thing is happening with, the NASH diet and no sugar and a paleo type approach, and then the other players followed that kind of stuff. I think now we are looking at this in the same vein where we were 5 or 6 years ago, where technology is enhancing everything that we're able to do. You have obviously all these vendors out here providing significant state-of-the-art stuff that they believe can tell you X or Y, or literally X and Y about where you are on the floor. And remain questions about how to best apply it, how to best collect the data, how to best interpret the data, and how to best use the data on people that are innately human actors. I mean, we're talking at the end of the day about human beings that make choices, whether they take a shot or don't take a shot, or whether they eat a cookie or don't take a cookie. I don't mean to make it that simplistic, but that's kind of what we're talking about here. The best laid plans can be violated if the actors cannot follow them. So when I think about this, the first thing I think about is the technology involved here. As technology improves, we theoretically can track and determine different things and more things, and data becomes larger and more complicated, and then teams and whoever else handle data have to have more staffers that handle it or a third party outside that handle it. My concern, if I'm looking at this from a player standpoint or an agency standpoint, is there's an established error rate in what we collect. Whether it's the sport view data, whether it's the catapult stuff or other zebra technologies, whatever it is, there's an inherent error margin in this, and some of it can be pretty significant. I was told by a number of team personnel that depending on what you're trying to track, in this case it was like play differentiation on the court, there's as much as 15 to 20% error in the raw data that comes down. So we're talking about, I don't know what it would be in terms of, if we're using it in terms of force or measuring speed or power or whatever it may be. But there are misidentified players, there's data that comes down that's not right, they lose the ball, whatever it may be. They identify a pick and roll as a dribble handoff or vice versa. So there's a margin of error involved in the raw data collection that sort of everybody acknowledges is there. Now you have teams that help you clean that up, but at the end of the day, you're not dealing with perfect data as is. Now we're looking at this in the sense of, well, okay, if you're dealing with a data set, well now, what do you do with it? With the situation that we have now with biometrics, until they open the CBA and renegotiate this, players cannot wear tracking devices on the court. So for a number of years now, teams and third parties have been trying to piece together this, this holy grail, so to speak, without the major piece, which is, can we measure you while you're playing games? They can wear these things in practice, but as people who follow the NBA know, you can't really go that hard or that often as the season goes along in practice. They have off-court training, whatever it may be, and they're sort of interpolating with sport view data or whatever else they're using to track on-court performance to approximate the load, the explosiveness, whatever it may be, and give some sort of global picture of fatigue and health and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, getting the tracking monitors on the players will be a significant addition to this set and help close that loop. But until we have that, you're sort of starting to guess. Colleges are starting to use it. I was talking to Brian Kopp about that. He said Marquette was using these devices this year, and it's going to be interesting to see what they came out of that. But it's going to be an interesting discussion as to what the players want to do with that and what that means then once we fill in that piece and have a more complete set in the biggest cauldron there is, which is the 82 games that you play in the regular season and then beyond on the playoffs. Then the question is, and I think more relevantly in terms of a discussion or talking about the CBA or how this is going to go with players and agents, there's a question of who owns certain data, right? So we have a situation, I spoke with Marcus Elliott at P3, the training facility. They were invited in 2014 to the NBA Combine to do some base testing on the prospects there. They did baseline testing for their explosiveness and all the types of stuff that they do at their facility out in Santa Barbara on the rookie class. And their determination, this was sort of a sampling. This was sort of like this wasn't supposed to be official and the data was just for internal use in terms of the NBA. But the data that they collected there where they hinted that a lot of the rookies in that class had structural deficiencies in the way they moved or imbalances in their muscles or some weaknesses in certain places. And the data that they had, and also Dr. Michael Clark, who is in charge of the Suns program, also was there as well and did his own testing. They sort of independently determined that rookie class was going to have significant health issues. And then it happened. You can't map, they didn't tell me specifically this guy was going to be this or this guy's going to be that, but we know what happened to that 2014 rookie class in its first season. There were a ton of major injuries that cost them chunks, if not all of the season. So the NBA kind of freaked out about that. It's like, wait a minute, you told us this guy was going to break his leg or whatever, and it actually happened. What should we do with this? And it opens up the question of, well, who owns that data? The NBA brings in a company like that to test the players. The company does the testing, they have the data. The players, it's their medical data, and the teams ultimately will be drafting, or in cases where teams already employ players, the teams are the employer. So what do you do? Who do you speak to in terms of the the data flow, the ownership of that data, who gets it first, who gets it after that, what kind of security is there. Now, obviously, on the player and agent side, the agents want this data so they know how to basically frame their player and get them the help. I'm not sure that they necessarily want the teams and the GMs to have the same access to certain things, because while I think overall the industry will be helped by this greater amount of player data and baseline data and testing, collectively the players will be helped in terms of longevity of career and being able to stay on the floor. There is going to be collateral damage, whether it's a player that is damaged physically and maybe has a warning sign that is going to ward off a team, whether something gets leaked. We all know that's not going to be 100% secure when rumors start getting around. I'm sure Adrian Woj will have 7,000 of these injury reports at some point. So, to me, that's a major question, and it goes beyond what the technological bounds are in terms of what we can do. Whether there's error rate or not, whether the teams are effective in their interpretation of the data, whether the communication of the data and the implementation of the data is as such that you have positive results for it. I think the bigger question, at least in my mind, is this morality/ethics issue with privacy laws and HIPAA and whatever else would go into it as to who controls the data and what's the partnership here. So, when I look at all of this and I look at the landscape of where we're going right now and what needs to be discussed in the next, year or so, when we assume the CBA is going to open up for renegotiation, this is going to be a major discussion point for the players' union. It'll probably be a negotiating point for the players' union. But what are you willing to give up? I asked a couple of people involved in the measuring space, wearables and technology and the like. I said, well, how is the Players Association and their agents supposed to gauge something to give up in a negotiation if you're kind of still ambiguous as to what the entire thing is? Like, what can you specify in here as technology continues to evolve, as you're not 100% sure about the implementation, as there are some concerns about what teams are able to do and not able to do in terms of taking fluids or measuring this or measuring that, and what do you want them to know about you? Do you care if you had a glass of wine last night? Do you care if you went out to the club last night? I mean, these are not perfect robots, to use a term. These are people, and they have flaws. And I don't know that employers should have that type of information about employees where they know every single thing you can do, even if the job is specifically related to your physical performance and your ability to do it. I doubt any of us would want that. So to me, that's really kind of where we are right now. So I would like to know more as a media member and somebody that loves basketball and loves talking to people immersed in this and is trying to understand the perspective from all parties. I really want to see how these answers evolve over the next 6 to 12 to 18 months as technology continues to benefit. We're in a phase where, look, NBA teams see technology. The technology people have to continue to explain and, really market and educate people on what gets done here with their devices. Then there's some early adoption. Then there's some testing results. They see what happens. And then there's some later adoption because nobody wants to get left behind in the NBA. So teams are doing, what they see other teams or hear other teams doing. And suddenly you have some more full immersion. By that point, you have new technology. This vicious cycle of adoption and then readoption and then readoption, and I think we're losing a little bit in here, especially in this biometrics phase, where nobody's really sure 100% the efficacy of this. Nobody's 100% sure yet about the applicability of some of this. You can take an entire data set. Some teams ask for, we want the raw data. Oh, really? Well, what are you going to do with all this? And how is it applied to all of your players? And do you have the staff to handle it? And can you do all that? I think these are all really, really interesting questions to do that. So I think what we're looking at right now is a phase where teams need to catch up again with technology. We're starting to see more things here in terms of a catapult device that not only is a biometric measuring thing, but also now GPS enabled and might then rope in sort of the sport view type application too. Right now we're collecting different types of data with different devices. The on-court tracking stuff obviously is different than what you need for the personal health. If you could wrap that all up into one data collect, is that better or worse, more complicated, less complicated, whatever it may be? The second part is trying to find things that are actionable, that are really applicable in the data, and not just say, hey, we're collecting data and we're drawing some conclusions from it, and we're not really sure ultimately how we're applying this and what the benefit is going to be, but finding smaller, maybe incremental steps to say we could do this, we could do that. We seem to be onto something with the sleep and the strategic rest of players. You know, there are stats that show how much worse players play when they have 0 days of rest versus 1 or 2. We know the impact of travel. Tom Haberstroh wrote a terrific article on the impact of the NBA schedule. When I spoke to Michael Clark for the book, he said that players lose 25% of their flexibility after a game. From the start of the game to the end of the game, he estimates 25% of their flexibility is gone. Then they get on a plane and they have to play the next day. Well, there's another 10 to 15% of their flexibility, and then these teams have to basically spend all this time strengthening or stretching out and you know, whatever it may be to get them ready to play the next day. It's a debilitating thing with the sleep, with the time zones, with the food, whatever it may be. We're making really incremental and positive steps in those areas. But where this goes from here, and fueled by the technology that we see coming in and getting more enhanced every day, I think is going to be amazingly fascinating, and I'm really, really excited to see where all of this is going. I think that it's going to be a major, major story in the next 6 to 12 months as you see this, and I'll be interested to see, A, what the Players Association agrees to, and then B, kind of where we go from there once the parties are more well-aligned. So that's about all I have to say right now. Once again, my book is Chasing Perfection. It just came out on Tuesday. I'd love you all to buy 20 copies of it. That would be awesome. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer a few privately before we get out of here. Thank you very much for the audience today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.